My name is Dustin Wheeler. My family calls me Duck Duck, and my love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go. Hello, all my feathered wine drinking friends. Welcome in for the next episode of the Duck Vine podcast. Still hanging out in one of my favorite countries, if you couldn't tell from the last episode, Italy. Right now we're going to talk kind of northern Italy as a whole. There's some unique areas here that can get very fun to explore, but with all that Italy has to offer at this point in time, I want to do more of a overview than super hardcore dives into all these subregions that Italy has. So think northern Italy. You probably, without even realizing, have known about this area for a long time. It is a setting for one of the most famous plays of all time. A little Romeo and Juliet action happened up in northern Italy. So just kind of an interesting little fact there. So when I talk about northern Italy, we're going to look at places such as the Veneto, Soave. We're going to visit Prosecco, which is, a favorite of a lot of people. We will get into Alto Adige a little bit, talk about some Amarones, Valpolicella. The list kind of goes on as a broad adventure into Italy. So why don't we just kind of jump right in and get to it. The big portion of northern Italy is going to be in the Veneto. It's where Verona is. That's where Romeo and Juliet took place. It is where we're going to see some very unique styles. Passamento and Passito. We'll talk about those. But it is leading wine producing region in terms of just output. We talked with the Piemonte being extremely important for high caliber, high quality wines, but the Veneto area is just mass production. And I don't mean like mass production in cheap box wine. There is some areas of that, but they've also done so much in these areas that try to combat that bulk production and still exemplify higher quality wines. But still, we're going to talk a lot about like Pinot Grigios, which can be done in high quantities and still produce some exceptional wines. And wines that we're probably drinking more often than not, day in and day out, versus your $50, $60, $200 bottles of Barolo that we talked about last episode. So the region of Veneto is also very common in the namesake, as in Venice, and that was actually named after the Veneti, which was a tribe that settled in this area about 1000 BC. It, as we know, talking about Venice, is surrounded by water. It was very important when it came to trade, as well as it became a leader in glass, architecture, art. Leonardo da Vinci was there. So many famous people came through Venice that laid the groundwork to make just Venice like the place to go, the trendy place to go in ancient times. And I still believe, Italy is up there in the forefront of leaders in clothing and all things hip and cool when it comes to that. Obviously, I'm not the hippest and the coolest, but maybe a trip to the Veneto will help fix some of that. But until I conquer my fear of flying, we're gonna travel there through a bottle of wine. So outside of Venice and the Adriatic coast, there are plains, the plains of the Veneto, that stretch inland. Pretty flat when we talk about these areas until we get to the Alps. This is also where we'll start to get into the Alto Adige region, which produces some phenomenal whites and one of the longest lasting reds I've ever had in my life. And in between these regions, that's where you'll find Suave, Valpolicella, some other things of that nature when we talk about wine. So I want to touch on a passamento and passito method. These are kind of hand in hand. You can hear it in it. It's more of a general term. Passito is to a passamento. It is the process that they do here in Italy where they dry wines or dry grapes that have been harvested and get them to start to raisinate, to concentrate their sugars before they start making them into wines. And even though it does concentrate the sugars, you can still get dry wines like Amarones out of this. When you get into the Amarones, and because of this drying process that as a passamento is, it creates some very earthy tones to the wine. Passito is more the general term for any wine that is dried or partially dried through this process. So it's really interesting. It's unique. But as we go through, we'll talk some more about that. So I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way. If you see that on a label, you'll have a little bit better understanding what those wines are and what the flavors will be like when you get into them. Outside of this very famous and unique drying method to make their wines, the Veneto is also home to one of the most successful wines in Italy, Prosecco. We all love it. We all have had it. And this is where it resides. Valdo Biondone, very famous region for the Galera grape and Prosecco. So here along the warmer coastal appellations and cooler alpine appellations, winemakers actually produce more than 10% of Italy's total production. That's equating to over 12 million gallons of wine a year. Much of it is from production of classified appellations, and the Veneto produces more DOC and DOCG wines than any other region in Italy, including probably two of the most famous that we would consider by namesake being Piedmont and Tuscany. We talked that this area was named after a tribe about 1000 BC, but it is believed that the area has been populated for more than 4,000 years. And it was part of the Roman Empire, so of course wine was very important. After the fall of Rome, Veneto saw constant invasions from Germanic tribes, which is interesting when I mentioned that we'll talk about Alto Adige, because that is an area historically that has gone back and forth, and even to this day they speak more French and German than they do Italian. By the 9th century AD, though, Veneto had become its own autonomous republic and acted as such for about 1,000 years. The growing wealth of Venice benefited the winemakers who perfected their wines in the plains and the foothills that surrounded the city. And in the late 1700s, Veneto was finally conquered and came under foreign control. Both the French and the Austrians have occupied the region up until about the late 1850s, until Italy finally became a unified nation. Today, Veneto makes some of the most interesting wines in Italy. We touched on some of that with the different stylistic choices with the drying out grapes, and of course with the very famous Prosecco as well. And depending on what area you're in, you can find some single varietals, but most of what this area flourishes on is in blends, where when we talked about Piedmont, we were very focused on Barolo and Barbaresco, and those being 100% Nebbiolo productions. Here you're going to see some blends. But some of the most famous grapes for your white, you're going to have Pinot Grigio. It's lean, acidic, reminiscent of green apples, citrus. When you get a Pinot Grigio out of the Veneto, you're not going to find oak on it. They prefer the fresh, bright characteristics of the grape, and they want to continue to enjoy that. And then on the red side, one of the most famous is Corvina. It is a cool climate red grape that's kind of grown all over. It produces more light-bodied, acidic red wines. And very delicious if you get it out of the Valpolicella area. It does show some concentrated red fruit, but also some smoky characteristics as well. So it gets really interesting flavors. It is also involved sometimes in those drying methods where you can really see some of those tannins come out. If you ever get a chance to visit this area, Veneto is just gorgeous. It's got stunning landscapes. Obviously, the city canals and waterways of Venice, breathtaking architecture and Roman ruins in the Verona. And then on the backside, you'll see those Italian Alps that we've been talking about. The mountains in the Adriatic Sea basically break Veneto into two very distinct climate zones. In the south, where that flat plain is also crisscrossed by rivers with big notoriety to the Po River that starts in the Piedmont and comes throughout the region. Temperate climates are mitigated by the warming influence of the Adriatic Sea. And to the north in the Alps, cooler conditions are obviously found there. And you'll see a difference in grape plantings because of this. Veneto is home to more than 20 DOC appellations and 3 DOCGs. Much of the top quality whites produced in the Veneto, both sweet and dry, are made in the Soave DOC, which is a personal favorite of mine. And then the Valpolicella region produces soft, light red wines. They do have some unique, powerful reds as well. But again, probably the most popular DOC that we're going to find here is Vado Biondone for Proseccos. Just a quick little fact on that one. Italy produces more sparkling wines than any other country in the world, which is kind of mind-boggling when we think about how popular or well-known the name of just champagne is. But it is a huge production where they make over 660 million bottles of sparkling wine a year. So now we're going to talk about the west side of the Veneto. In between the Veneto and Piedmont, there's a couple of regions that run just north of Tuscany, Emilia Romagna, Liguria, and Lombardy, as well as just slightly north of Piedmont. There is also the Val d'Aosta. So Emilia-Romagna spans an area from the Adriatic Sea almost all the way across northern Italy before it hits Liguria. It's a large region just north of Tuscany and south of Lombardy and the Veneto. It is very famous for balsamic vinegar and the centrally located capital of Bologna. It is one of Italy's top producing wine regions, accounting for almost 15% of its total production. Most of the production is IGT and Vino de Tavola, which is basically like table wine. So mass production, not the highest driving dollar amount, though. When we talk about Liguria, it's a thin coastal region that wraps kind of around the northwest, around the border of Emilia-Romagna, across the southern boundary of Piedmont. This area does run all the way across the sea there, and actually ends up stopping at Provence, which, coming out of France, as we know, is kind of interesting because when you get into this region, very famous for its whites and rosé production. Lombardy, or Lombardia, which is centrally located in the area of the Italian Alps, right above Emilia-Romagna. Lombardy is a small region in terms of production, but it produces some of Italy's top wines, of course, being sparkling. It almost can be broken into three sections, and the southwestern border actually borders Piedmont and is known for producing high-quality sparklings and Pinot Nero, or Pinot Noir as well. Multiple DOCs reside in this area, and they produce top sparkling wines that fall more in line with the traditional method, so champagne method instead of Prosecco's. Now, the city of Milan, which we all know for fashion, also resides in this area and has a local grape that is also related to Nebbiolo called Cevinesca. It is one of the few places where the grape really thrives outside of Piedmont. And then probably some of the best sparklings outside of some of the high-end Prosecco's that you'll run into is also found in Lombardia, which is a sparkling wine called Francocordia. This is where you'll find their DOCG. These are traditional method sparklings. If you ever get a chance to try them, they are fantastic. They usually spend a lot of time on their lees before they go through disgorgement, and kind of follow a similar idea to France. You'll find Pinot Nero here, Pinot Bianco, and Chardonnay to produce these sparklings. And then the Val d'Aosta, which is actually Italy's smallest region. It, of course, produces the least amount of wine, but it is a unique region that sees some really harsh growing conditions. So it's not surprising that some of the productions that come out of here are more limited. Now, on the other side of the Veneto, and kind of on the north side as well, is Friuli Venezia Giulia. Usually they simplify it and just call it Friuli. It is a small region located northeast of the Veneto, bordering Austria. to the north and Slovenia to the east. This was an area that was very, very hard hit by phylloxera following in the 1800s. And then after that, many international grape varieties did end up getting planted. Chardonnay, Riesling, along with Pinot Noir or Pinot Nero. These are still widely planted today, along with several indigenous varieties, especially a grape called Tokai. Here it's spelt a little bit different than what you would see in Hungary, but it is a very fantastic wine nonetheless. Hungary, though, really is the experts when it comes to that. With several DOC appellations in the region, most of the excitement in Friuli today revolves around modern style white wines, mostly made with international varietals. There are 2 DOCG appellations in Friuli: the Ramandalo, which produces a variety of dry and sweet white wines, and the Colli Orientale del Friuli Piccoli, which is very famous for its sweet white wines, made from the Piccoli varietal. Trento Adige is the northernmost region of Italy. It is bordered by the Veneto on the south, Lombardy to the west, and Austria to the north. Most of this region is mountainous and has a cool to cold climate. And the Alps start to actually stretch and run through it. Most of the vineyards here are planted on terrace slopes to help maximize sun exposure. And Trento Adige is one of the 3 regions that make up the area known as the Tres Venezze, or the 3 Venices. So that's Trento Alto Adige, Friuli, and Veneto. The region is divided into 2 very different sections: the Trentino, which is the northern section, which has a very strong German heritage, and Alto Adige, the southern area that has more of an Italian and French kind of heritage. In Trentino, the German style wines and grapes are grown here. What's interesting when you get into these wines, and you do see it in Alto Adige as well, but especially coming out of Trentino, you'll see even the bottles. When I walk up to a table with some of these bottles, people are like, "Oh, I didn't order a Riesling." I'm like, "It's not a Riesling. It's an Italian wine." But because there's been so much Germanic influence throughout the centuries, they still use more German bottles. So they're using the dark brown bottles or dark green bottles, and they're the slim, slender, tall bottles versus the more traditional, sloped, shouldered bottles that we would typically think of with whites. So in Alto Adige, Pinot Grigio dominates most of the production. There are no DOCG regions in Trentino Alto Adige, but the majority of its production takes place in more than a dozen DOC appellations. What I love about this area and these 2 kind of regions is, of course, when we talk Italy, Italian, we think food. Food is a big player of their everyday life and is, to them, almost more important than breathing. When you get into these wines, and I know we've said it, and I'll say it again at some point, but you really get a sense of place with these wines and their food. We talk about it, what grows together goes together. But here is exemplified into another kind of realm. When I talk to tables about some of these wines, Pinot Bianco for Alto Adige, or I talk about Lagrein. Lagrein maybe is a grape you've never heard of, but is one that you should take the opportunity to get to know. Lagrein is this deep, dark red, You're not seeing any ounce of light through it, but when you get into it, has this super long finish that just hangs around and keeps giving you flavor, but so unique because it's coming out of the Alps where it's supposed to be cold and you're not supposed to get full-bodied reds. They're supposed to be lighter in style. That's what happens everywhere else in Italy. When you talk about Nebbiolo or any of those grapes, and you see the color that comes off of those and how translucent it is, and then you get to Alto Adige right up against the Alps, and it's so unique that you're getting this dark wine, and it just goes on and on. But I love its drying characteristic. This area is famous for cured meats and cheeses. Think charcuterie all day, every day. You're talking like where I want to be. And of course, these cured meats, again, have this strong Germanic influence that have led them to be such a leader with these products, that these wines pair so well with them. Think about eating a few pieces of charcuterie or a cured meat and how it can kind of leave that oily, almost like greasy feel on the roof of your mouth, and you just want it to go away. You're like, you look like a dog with peanut butter stuck to its gums, kind of a thing. You're just trying to get it off. And then you take a sip of Liguria, and bam, there it is. This flavor rushes in. This dryness takes everything out of your mouth. You've been set back to square one. And there's this meaty wine hanging around with some pepper qualities that's just looking for some kind of food to complement it. And you pop another piece of charcuterie in your mouth, and you find the perfect mate to then want to go back and get some more wine. It is absolutely incredible the way that they have cultivated and grown and shaped this wine to be such a pairing and such a great pairing with these cured meats that they've become so famous for. And that's just the red, mind you. And talk about Pinot Bianco, right? I struggle sometimes when I talk about this wine when I go to a table, because what I want to tell you guys is it's this full white, but it's not a heavy white. It's a complementary white. And I feel like it's like cream for your coffee. You have something that has some bitterness to it, you get this wine. So I think of some of these hard cheeses, some of these cheeses that have some funk to them, and it's almost like this wine has cream in it. Now, why I say I struggle to explain this is because I say this cream note, and my worry is that you'll go, oh, it's oaky, it's buttery, it's like a Chardonnay. It's not that. It's not dairy creamy. It's just velvety. It's smooth. It's round. It would be like if you took a hard cheese and somehow can make it soft. So you're, again, back in the charcuterie board, and some of these meats and some of these cheeses that may be a little bit more rough or tough, and then you put a little Pinot Bianco in there and has this velvety, smooth, creamy texture to it. It's like the greatest pairing of all time. I'm telling you, if you ever go anywhere and you're bringing a charcuterie plate with you, find a wine from Alto Adige, Pinot Bianco. There's Cantina Terlano is a fantastic example for one. And then Liguria, if you can find most of the high quality Ligurians, there are some single producers, but what's nice with Liguria is because it's not this super sought after wine that people are beating down doors for. There's some great co-op producers that make some fantastic quality flavor Liguria wine. One that I would recommend, that if you can find, they're a unique co-op that started after their founder spent time in California and saw what California was doing in the late 70s after the Judgment of Paris had happened, and he read about it. So he went to California and saw how they were doing qualities, came back to Alto Adige, and started a co-op. It started with, I think, around 76 different families, and now has over 350 families involved. I'm probably going to butcher the heck out of this, but it is called Schreckelbich Culturrenzio. So SCHRECKBICHLCOLTERENZIO. If you look them up and you get their grind, it is a fantastic experience. Hands down, bar none. Get it, try it, love it, have some charcuterie. This will wrap up our journey across northern Italy. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think you can tell just from a brief overview that this is a region that has a lot to offer. So if it is something that you're interested in, we can definitely do a deeper dive as we continue making this podcast for you guys. I think in the next episode, we'll start looking to head south into some very fun regions. But, Tuscany, Super Tuscans, Chiantis. Are we going to go down to Mount Etna? Are we going to end up in, I don't know, maybe somewhere where there's some volcanoes like Vesuvius, Campania? I don't know. But what I do know is you'll have to stay tuned to find out where the next episode will lead us. So, again, everyone, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for telling all your friends. Thanks for downloading. If you do so see it and have the ability, of course, all the financial contributions and signing up to support the podcast on the Buzzsprout website goes a long way to keeping the lights on and getting better equipment, better education. We're going to start doing classes as well. So if you're interested in a class, please let me know what topics you might want to dive into and get some wines for. Really appreciate each and every single one of you and taking your time to listen to this that we work on. As always, though, I hope you had some fun. Maybe you learned a few things, but at the end of the day, we got to drink some wine. Thank you guys, and until next time, bye-bye.